for joining us today. We're excited to have Ashley McMichael on the call today. Ashley, I kind of tease her because I'm not a South City person, and she's a huge fan of South City. She's a believer and a lover in South City, so I appreciate that. I'm a St. Charles guy, so I don't have as much appreciation for South City as she does. But it's fun. And Ashley and I see each other regularly, and she flips houses. She's got long-term rentals and short-term rentals, so experience in all areas of that. So today she's going to be talking about a case study of a deal that she did recently, and it's unique in the aspect of she gets tax credit. So when you're running your numbers, not only are you looking at how much you have into it, what your cash flow is going to be, you got this bonus. I call it a bonus. I don't know if that's the right word, but you get this check credit that is sellable if you wanted to, or you can just use it for your own taxes. I don't know, a year or two later, I don't know how long it takes, but
maybe 5. I don't know.
5. Right.
At some point, I'll get money, I think.
Exactly. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, Ashley, and I'll let you take it over, and appreciate you being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go to the presentation mode in a second, but I'll start you guys out with some pictures. So thanks again for having me. I'm Ashley McMichael. Like Brian said, I am mostly a buy and hold investor, and I do a lot with the BRRRR method. So I do a lot of rehabs with these houses that we buy normally. We started investing in 2019 or so, when I quit my W-2 job and started doing this full time, if you will, with a baby at home in 2021. So yeah, so this is 4252 Wyoming Street that I'm going to walk you through. And I will start with some pictures. And I apologize, this project is close to being finished, but I don't have the wonderful after pictures that I would love to share with you. I'll post them on Facebook. But I'll show you some during, and we're kind of getting close to the end now, but I'll run you through all this. So this is 4252 Wyoming Street. This is a duplex in Tower Grove South in South St. Louis City. They are just 1 bed, 1 bathroom units. And the building is about 1,600 square feet. They each have a dining room and a separate kitchen, like a real traditional bedroom. So it was in fine-ish condition. It needed a lot of cosmetics, that needed a lot of systems too. But in terms of it's a 100-year-old house. So really a lot of that molding and stuff was actually in pretty good condition when we bought it. This is the upstairs unit.
Hey, Ashley.
Yeah.
Are you clicking through the photos right now?
Oh yeah, is it not working?
No,
We
we're not
can't
seeing
see
it.
Oh no.
Do you have 2 screens? Or when you shared, you might have just hit to share your PowerPoint instead of your whole computer.
Oh no. Okay, hang on just a second. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. Let's see. Let me try that again. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I think I just shared my PowerPoint maybe.
There we go.
Okay, let me try that again.
Perfect. We see your photos. Thank you.
Pictures? Okay,
Yep.
sorry. Thanks guys.
No, you're all good.
Okay, so let's try this again. So this is my duplex. These are 1-1 flats, if you will. So this is the downstairs unit. You walk in, living room, dining room that goes down to the basement, kitchen. So it's definitely dated. I'll talk more about this in a second. This house was actually a probate sale. So I think it had been a couple years since it had been lived in. So it needed some love, but some of the historic features were in really great condition. This is the upstairs unit, bedroom, kitchen. The upstairs occupant really liked pink. sunroom. We're going to talk more about this stairwell. This stairwell it was in the back of the house, and it went from the second floor down to the basement. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Systems were older. We just went ahead and decided to build that into the budget. The duplex only had one electric panel, and we definitely wanted to address that. We wanted to make sure that the units could be separately metered. So that was something we built in. And then there's the back, and it does have a 2-car parking pad in the back, but it doesn't have a garage or anything like that. Okay, let me see. Back to PowerPoint. Great. Okay. So kind of ran you through the basic info on this deal. So this was actually a property that was listed on the MLS back in September of 2021. And like I said, so it was a little bit different, even though it was advertised on the MLS, this was a probate sale. So it was St. Louis City selling the property for the estate. And there's just a couple little intricacies that go into making probate sales different, even when they're posted on the MLS. So basically, I submitted an initial offer. This was a duplex. It was something that I would have loved to have owned. I wasn't sure at the time that was going to be my exit strategy, but it was in Tower Grove South, which is actually the neighborhood I live in. So I really liked, the location, and I saw a lot of potential in it. So I submitted an offer, and my initial offer was a bit lower than ask. And normally what happens with these probate sales is you have to put in an offer to get in the game, if you will. And then they'll come back to you and they'll say, okay, we've got other offers. Everybody submit your best and final. And there were no other offers on this one. So I got this property for $121,000. And it had initially been listed at $165,000. So yeah, so no dramatic auctioning or anything like that on this one. And then we actually had this property appraised in January of 2022. And it appraised for the ARV value, or after construction value, $280,000. Okay, so this project did not go as planned. In fall of 2021, I had a lot going on. I had a couple other rehabs, and I was expecting a baby, my first baby, in November. And I was like, this is a great property. I definitely want to do something with it, but I don't think I have the bandwidth to do a huge rehab right now. So my plan was to wholesale the property. So I had it locked up at $121,000. I really thought that their asking price at $164,000 was probably closer to what it was worth. And I immediately got it locked up to sell as a wholesale deal, to assign the contract at $165,000. So that would have been a pretty nice spread for me. But then around, a week or so before closing, the buyer went dark. He claiming he had COVID, and so he never submitted his earnest money. It was all very sketchy, and there were warning signs, but there were also things like he was a reputable or more reputable buyer, and he was also working with an agent. So his agent was the one kind of communicating between the two of us. So it was all very weird. But anyways, he broke his contract. And I was kind of back to the drawing board. So after a very long, indecisive period, literally, guys, I sat on this property for a year before I made a decision of what I was going to do with it, or before I had the capacity to do anything with it. And during this time, I learned about the historic tax credit process. And I, decided that this might actually be a really good tax credit candidate project. So we decided to go that route. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this real brief, but I thought I'd give you a breakdown of kind of what the historic tax credit process looks like. And this is a whole lot of information compressed so short. So please keep that in mind. And there are people whose job it is to consult you through this process. And I highly recommend you hire one of those people, because I am not the expert in this, but here's what I know. So there are Missouri historic tax credits. Those are state tax credits. And there are also federal historic tax credits. And those would be federal tax credits that you could use against your federal taxes. So for the state program, and actually for both programs, the first kind of barrier to entry is, does your property qualify? So your property needs to be on the National Register of Historic Places. There's a couple other workarounds that may make your property qualify or not, but that's kind of the first thing, is you go to this map and you figure out if your property, might be eligible for tax credits. For state tax credits, they will give you, or you have to spend on construction expenses 50% or more of the purchase price. So I paid $121,000 for this property. So I'd be looking to be eligible for this. I would have needed to spend, what's that, about $62,000 in rehab. And then this tax credit is worth 25% of eligible expenses. And I'll talk just a minute about what those eligible expenses are. But basically you do the rehab and they write you a check back or a credit back for 25%. For the federal tax credits, you can pair these, so you can use them in tandem. They follow the same guidelines. So construction wise, you don't have to do different things for state versus federal. They're pretty in sync with what they require of you doing to the property. But the guidelines are a little bit different. So they will give you 20% of your eligible expenses back. So a 20% tax credit on your rehab. And then for federal, you actually have to hold the property as an income producing property. So in order to take advantage of the full federal tax credit, this has to be a rental for at least 5 years. And they're going to pay out your tax credit a little bit at a time over that 5-year period. But the kind of the big kicker to get federal is your construction costs have to be 100% of your adjusted basis. So there's a formula for that, but more or less, you're looking at closer to $121,000 in rehab costs to get the full extent of this federal tax credit. So what are qualified expenses? So the things that they will give you these tax credits back on include your soft costs. So these are things like your architect. If you hire a historic consultant to help you with this process, those fees count. Real estate taxes, utilities, any interest that you're paying during this time, your accounting fees, stuff like that. And then in terms of your actual construction costs, it has to be within the footprint of the building. So this means think like basement of the house to the roof of the house would all count. And then your outer walls. So if you had masonry or anything you needed to do to the inside counts. And you can count your labor and your materials. But whatever your count or anything that counts has to be permanent to the building. So things like window treatments or appliances, cabinet poles and stuff like that, they're not going to give you credit back on. And then new construction, including detached garages, I think even attached garages, if that was the case, or new additions that aren't historic to the house, those would also be excluded. You wouldn't get tax credits back on those. Fencing and landscaping, those don't count either. Not saying that you can't do those things. You can absolutely do, landscaping as part of your rehab. I'm just not going to get tax credits back on whatever portion I spend on that process. And then the key concepts for doing a historic rehab is you really need to repair when possible and replace only when needed. So a couple examples I had for this house, it's a 100-year-old house and it had a lot of the original wood flooring. So we really need to try to refinish those floors. They're not going to be happy with you if you go in and lay LVP over the top of those floors. Another example I had is there were some stained glass windows that had some cracks in them. It was really important to the historic board that we repair those windows and we keep them in shape. So I probably, it wasn't as expensive as I thought it would be. But but that may not normally be something that you spend money on as a rental. And for this process, we paid that money and we got some stained glass windows fixed. So a couple examples there. You'll see in a second, things like dated kitchens and bathrooms, they're totally fine if you go in and renovate those. So that's kind of replacing where you need to. And then, like I said, you can use the state and federal tax credits in tandem. So this is a possibility of getting 45% of your rehab costs back in the form of a tax credit. Okay, so this was my initial rehab budget. This is a duplex, so some of these things require two. But yeah, so we went down the line. We just decided, we're gonna do everything. We're gonna do systems, and we're gonna do the electric and the plumbing. It needed a cosmetic gut for the most part, but a lot of that molding and flooring and stuff you saw is in great condition, and we're just gonna refinish it and leave it as is. So my rehab budget initially was around 125,000. It's more than what I paid for the property. So now you're in that realm of you qualify for both state and federal taxes. Okay, and I will show you some after pictures. This
Can
is,
I ask a question real quick?
yeah, sorry.
It didn't need a new roof?
It did not need a new roof. So I actually had three roofing contractors come out and bid that project for me. And, the consensus we got was you actually don't need a new roof right now. So
Wow.
we did
Okay.
not budget that in. Yeah. Okay. And I've done a lot of flat roofs, so trust me, it's high on the things that I think about. But so these are really my during and after pictures. Like I said, we're probably 2 or 3 weeks away from being totally done, but I just don't have the beautiful pictures that I would love to show you guys today. But I thought I'd walk you through some of the things that we did do on this property. So this is standing in the kitchen of, looks like the first floor here. And one of the things we were allowed to do, and one of the things we took advantage of doing, was we actually blew out that back stairwell. And what we're going to do, or what we did, is we expanded both the first floor and the second floor bathrooms into what was this back stairwell. So these were really small bathrooms before. Now they're a much bigger size. And this also gave us room to add in-unit washer and dryers on both the first and the second floor. And otherwise, we just didn't have that space before. So yes, now the second floor tenant does not have access to the basement. I just don't think it's that big of a deal. But this is kind of the demo work of getting rid of that stairwell. This is, once it's framed out. So this is my new bathroom. And you can kind of see where that old stairwell was. Another look at it from the bedroom. So this is a much more updated picture. There's a couple little things that would have made these pictures so much better. But we have appliances just sitting in my dining rooms right now. And our electrician has kind of been MIA. So my light fixtures have been sitting there for about a week and a half. My appliances are sitting there and they're just not in yet. But we're getting really close. I think, a couple more weeks and we'll be done. And then the very last thing that we're going to do is refinish the flooring. So we didn't want to have any contractors going in and out before after the floors were done. So that'll be the very, very last thing. And then we did do all the systems. So we did new furnaces, we did new water heaters, and this property historically didn't have AC, but it was, it just takes money. It didn't cost a whole lot to add new AC. And we did split the electric panels, which is also kind of an expensive process that, I wouldn't have thought would be so expensive. But now the units will be separately metered, which, could be really important if you're renting them out to long-term tenants. And we did some exterior facelift and paint, if you will. Okay. Okay, so here's kind of a breakdown of my final numbers. So my purchase price was $121,000. My rehab costs, and again, sorry, this is going to be really projected because like I said, we're about 95% of the way done. My rehab costs are going to be closer to 130,000. I think after I factor in, we did pay an architect to blow out that back stairwell and to create the layout for it. And then just a couple little things, including like landscaping and stuff like that. So I think I'll be closer to 130, but for a bigger project, we're pretty on budget. My holding costs between, insurance and taxes and interest sitting on this property for so long are about $10,000. So my all-in costs are going to be close to $262,000 for this property. Like I said, we had it appraised in January of last year and it came in at 280, and this market, especially in this part of South City, has not slowed down. I think very conservatively, this duplex is now worth 300,000. It's going to be totally new, top to bottom, and I think it could even be worth more than that. But for being conservative, that's the number we're going to say. So the amount of equity created just after buying and rehabbing this property is about $38,000. The kicker is this tax credit piece. So of all of those costs that I just mentioned, I am looking at about $63,000 back in tax credits, and that's broken down between a $35,000 state credit and a $28,000 federal credit. So if you add your equity and your tax credits together, the number of kind of realized profit for me there is about $101,000. And then here's what my rental numbers look like. When I decided that we were going to rehab it, I was really just a long-term investor at that time. And I was like, oh yeah, the numbers will totally make sense as a long-term rental. I can rent the units out for about $1,000 a unit, which honestly right now, probably a little low, probably could get more than that. But that's a monthly rental rate of $2,000 for the building. My principal and interest is going to be $1,143-ish a month. My expenses on a long-term rental, I'm only paying insurance, taxes, and maintenance. I really have my tenants pay all the utilities at this point. So expenses are around $400. And maintenance is just me budgeting for myself so that I have a pot to pull from if, things come up. So that's cash flow of $456 a month after everything's paid for. Now, the route that I think we're going to go with this is I actually think we're going to turn both units into midterm rentals. I just opened my first midterm rental not too far from here, also in a duplex, and it is just killing it and booked through the end of September right now. So I think we're going to furnish both units, and I think we're going to try the midterm rental rate, which is probably going to be closer to $2,000 a unit per month. So $4,000 overall. Same principal and interest. Now your expenses for a midterm rental or short-term rental are going to be a little bit higher. You're going to have, your taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, but you also pay all of the utilities, is pretty typical. And I also factored in 8% vacancy for the midterm rentals. My long-term rentals, I don't use vacancy because I just don't have that kind of vacancy. But for midterm and short-term rentals, I definitely wanted to add in that vacancy. So my cash flow is, close to $1,500 a month, making this a midterm rental. So that's the route we're gonna go and try. All right, so some lessons learned on this project. I would say the first one is always have multiple exit strategies. So when I bought this property, I thought I wanted to wholesale it, but I definitely liked it as part of my portfolio. I just didn't think I had the bandwidth at the time to do anything with it, and I didn't. And so, having that exit strategy of it didn't work as a wholesale, but I'm happy to keep it and rehab it, worked really well. Also, with historic tax credits, I do a lot with old houses, and not every house that I look at or buy is a great candidate for a historic rehab project, right? Some houses that you buy, you're going to be buying for let's say 150,000 and it only needs 20,000. That's not a great candidate. You just don't need to spend enough. I don't need to make myself spend more just to get the tax credits, like just things to keep in mind. But having that historic rehab piece in your toolbox is like, it's just a valuable skill that you can add to a project, and it may make sense sometimes. I would also say I learned to vet wholesale buyers more carefully. Not that it like deterred me from ever wholesaling again, but I haven't done many wholesale deals since then. Just decided that wasn't really my niche at the time. But looking back, I would have required a higher earnest money proof of funds, probably would have vetted him a little bit more carefully. And then kind of my last lesson learned is just like, don't let a deal that doesn't go as planned deter you. I've been holding and working on this property for almost 2 years. But I learned a lot along the way. I found new contractors that I really like. I've learned this piece of historic tax credits, and we'll still end up being okay on this one. Here is a link, and I don't know, maybe share the PowerPoint with Brian, but here's a link if you want to find out more about historic tax credits. This is the national site, and from there you can get to all the state sites. And then here is my contact info if anybody wants that also, and I can share that with Brian. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing then.
Awesome. Great presentation, Ashley. Really enjoyed it. So let's do some Q&A for a little bit. I'll get it started because I've never done a tax credit project. I've bought some tax credits before, but I've never actually done the project. So do you feel like following the rules and jumping through the hoops or whatever lengthens your time with the rehab or increases your cost of the rehab? And if so, by how much?
So I think it can. Like I said, this is a very cumbersome process. There's a lot to know. There's just so many intricacies, which is why I strongly would encourage you to hire a consultant. It's just the fees that they'll charge you are just gonna not even be a blip on your radar in terms of like doing the project and getting your tax credits back. So I highly encourage that. I would say timeline wise, this was going to be a big rehab for me with systems and new plumbing and electric anyways. I don't think for this particular project, I don't think following the historic guidelines really slowed me down. I also kind of think that's another piece of, is your project a good candidate for this or not? Some houses like this one are in really good shape in terms of like historic characteristics. And I didn't have to go in and like try to recreate a bunch of historic molding and stuff like that. And I think if you had a project where, maybe you did have to repair a lot of those historic characteristics, I think that would cost you a lot of money and also a lot of time. Same thing for windows. Windows can be pretty pricey, especially when you're talking about, if the windows have never been updated and they're still kind of the original wood windows, you have to go in and replace those with, really high quality wood windows that are going to cost you a lot of money. A tip on that is if things have already been done, like if windows have already been replaced to vinyl, you don't have to go backwards and undo the vinyl windows. So that's just another kind of thing to look at when you're pricing and determining if it's a good tax credit project.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do the consultants help you like determine if it's a good candidate or not?
They can give you a good idea about what you may be allowed and not allowed to do. So originally we were looking at like, can we move these rooms around and maybe relocate the kitchen to make it a 2-bedroom house and stuff like that. And your consultant can, if they're good, they should be able to tell you like, yes, you're allowed to do that, or no, like that won't be approved. So the risk you're running with this tax credit program is you have to have your application submitted before any of the work you do counts towards the tax credits. But it takes so long to get things approved that you don't really want to sit around and hold even longer and wait to see if you're going to be approved. So we kind of like you submit and it's kind of like fingers crossed, like hopefully you're approved down the road. But you really want to get working on it. So we were probably, I don't know, 6 months into rehab when we got the notice back that we had been pre-approved basically. And so now the process is we finish the rehab, the consultant will go back in and take the after photos to show that we did what we said we were going to do. And, you submit your budgets and your receipts and everything like that. And that's kind of how you close out the application process. And again, you're kind of fingers crossed, like waiting for it to come back as approved. So
So
think-
along those lines, you probably answered this question and I didn't hear it, but like Michael's on the call here, he's just starting a rehab that's probably in a historic district. And Andrew Lowe, who had to jump off earlier, but we showed his house earlier, he just finished it and he bought his property for 170 grand and he put like more than 170 grand into it.
Yeah.
But it's done. I mean, can you go back at this point or is it too late?
No, at least for this program, it's too late. Because yeah, anything that you want to get tax credits back on, you have to do after you have submitted your application, is my understanding. Again, not the expert, but that's my understanding.
Gotcha.
There is another program that I would encourage, especially South or like not South, but St. Louis City investors to look at, called the Neighborhood Preservation Tax Credit Act. So that one's shortened to NPA is what that's called. And depending on when you're doing your project, NPA can be a really good tax credit opportunity for you, especially if you're a flipper. But NPA is only open, it opens in January and you submit your application in January. And you find out by June if you've won the lottery for it, and if you can get that tax credit. And so there may be some workarounds with NPA if they sold or what the timeline of those projects are. But again, kind of if you have something coming up at the beginning of the year, that would be a good thing to apply for. So I actually did get NPA tax credits on a house that I did last year that we ended up selling. And yeah, that's going to be like 35% of $125,000 rehab back if I ever get those credits in the mail, but we are fully approved for that. So just another tool for your toolbox.
And you submitted it for it after you did the rehab?
So I applied for it in January. So the timeline on that one is I had started the rehab in fall of 2021. We applied for NPA in January. And then you find out in June, we found out in June of 22 that we had gotten selected. And so in that particular case, I was able to go back and do the extent of my whole project and submit for tax credits. That one is like a span, don't quote me on this, it's like a span of 2 years though. So as long as you are in a 2-year window, when you get the tax credit awarded to you, or when you're selected from their lottery, you can get the tax credits. The kicker with that one is it has to be owner occupied. So you really kind of have to be thinking like you're either personally going to move into it or you're going to sell it to an owner occupant. If you sell it to an LLC, they're probably not going to be happy.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so maybe something to do there. But I also know it's June now and the window doesn't open up to apply until January. So, or May now.
Fascinating stuff. Anybody else got any questions for Ashley?
Have you gotten the state tax credits yet for this one? Or are you still kind of going through that process?
Yeah.
Does it take a while, like a couple months, years?
I will see how long it takes. So I'm waiting on the NPA credits to come back. That's, it's already been 6-ish months So we'll see how long that takes. It sounds to me like Missouri used to have a really robust tax credit department, and I don't know if it was COVID or just as people left, they didn't replace people. But, according to my consultant, it seems like the Missouri department that handles the tax credits is really dwindling down right now, which is a bummer because it just slows everything down. I don't think it's going to deter me from doing these things. I kind of see it as icing on the cake on these projects, right? You do the paperwork and you're going to be rewarded at some point. But I think, it's going to take a while probably.
So if anybody wants to see one, this is what it looks like when you actually get it. I just bought this one. So you can see the date on it when I bought it, which was like a couple weeks ago. And the work was done in January to December of 2019. So that one took 4 years.
Yeah, I truly hope that they can turn it around faster than 4 years, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And I think what's important, because I don't know if everyone understands this about tax credits, you can use that tax credit to go towards what you owe on your taxes, but you don't actually just get a check in the mail. You can only use it when you owe. So that's why people will buy them, because sometimes you don't owe that much, or you already have other tax credits and you don't owe more than that. So that's sometimes why you'll have to look for a buyer to sell those, and that's how you can, get paid that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So for your state tax credit ones, I think you can go backwards 2 years. So you could decide to go back and, offset your taxes from the last 2 years. And I think you can go forward 5 years. But if you're not going to have that much in state tax credits, in 7 years, then it makes a lot of sense to look for a buyer like Brian to sell your credits to. The only downside to that is now you also have to pay taxes on selling your tax credits.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. Holy smokes, that's
know,
really a
you
bummer.
do.
Isn't it?
I know.
Jeez.
Now, the federal tax credits, I guess you can sell them, but it's really, really complicated. But for that reason, I think you're allowed to apply them for like 20 years or something. So you have a lot longer to use your federal tax credits than your state.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, anybody else got anything, Mike or Mike?
I've got
Mike or Mike?
not a question, but just a comment. One of my best friends actually just a couple months ago, bought a duplex on that same block as you. And like every time I went over there were like 3 other dumpsters on the block. And so nice to know someone that was one of the other dumpsters.
Yeah, you're so right. There's so much going on that block right now.
Yeah. And then he's living in the lower unit, and right now he's working on the upper unit just all on his own. But his like long-term plan for it is to either midterm or short-term rental. So he'll be happy to know that you're thinking the same thing and that you guys will be good comps for each other down the line.
Yeah, I think it's a great market. It's a great location for it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Aaron that you're talking about?
That's actually Callahan. I don't think you know him. He really enjoys doing rehabs himself. And so he hasn't gotten into using hard money or that sort of stuff yet. He's been just doing an FHA to purchase and then taking his time renovating on his own. So.
Very cool. All right, well, we'll wrap it up with that, Ashley. That was awesome presentation. Thank you for jumping on and sharing. It's good to have a presentation like that we can put on our YouTube page and website for sometime in the future when somebody buys a historic tax credit, they can go back and reference it and so forth. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Anybody got any other just general win or question or comment they want to throw out today before we wrap up? All right, I think we'll call it good for today. Ashley, for those that don't know, Ashley's out in Arizona at the moment, so it's 100 degrees out there. So go out and get some, or maybe don't go out, I don't know, but.
Working on my tan 10 minutes at a time.
There you go. There you go. Sounds good. We'll see you guys all next week. Appreciate you coming.
Oh, wait, no call next week. No
Good
call next week,
reminder.
but we'll be back first week of June. Or I guess, yeah, first week of June.
Good reminder. Suzanne and Rachel and I are all going to be in Nashville next week. So no call next week. So thanks for reminding us, Suzanne.
Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you guys.